Enter, and also Rabbi Yisrael Leib ben
Leah Rachel.
Leah Rachel. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. It's at Rabbi Yisrael's age, any illness is a serious illness. So we hope that he will be back with us soon. Right. Okay. So let's mute everyone and let's start. Now, if you remember last week, well, by the way, just to let everyone know where we're up to, chapter 18 in Shmuel Aleph. We've finished with David and Goliath, and we're now going to be talking about the relationship between David and Shaul, and how that deteriorates together with Shaul's state of mind. And if you remember at the end of last week's shiur, Jeffrey read out in very dramatic fashion the psukim of 6, 7, 8, and 9, which I'm going to ask him to do again. We did 6 in some detail. We talked about the women coming out of the cities of Israel with their musical instruments. We decided that a timbrel was a tambourine without the bells on. In the end, excuse me, in the end, that's what we decided. And then we had 7, 8, and 9, which we're going to deal with this week. So, Jeffrey, when you're ready, if you want to unmute yourself and read for us again verses 6, 7, 8, and 9, please.
It happened that when the troops came back, when David returned from slaying the Philistine, that the women from all the towns of Israel came out to sing with timbrels to greet King Saul, with drums, with gladness, and with cymbals. The rejoicing women called out and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul grew very angry, and this matter was disturbing in his eyes. He said, they have attributed to David 10,000s, while to me they have attributed thousands. He is lacking only the kingship. And Saul eyed David with suspicion from that day on. It happened.
So, that's it. We'll stop there for the moment. 7, 8, and 9. We'll stop there. Now, it's very obvious, isn't it, from verse 8, that Shaul is not happy with the song that the ladies who are coming out of the cities of Israel to sing have been singing. And they are singing, the cheering women sang out and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. It's very obvious from verse 8, isn't it, that Shaul sees that as a slight to him. He says, they ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they ascribed thousands. And he's not happy about that. Do you think that that is a rational explanation of the women's song, or do you think that's irrational? So I suppose what I'm asking you is, what do you think was the women's intention when they sang that song? Did they intend to insult Saul? Did they intend to compare David and say that David is 10 times better than Saul? What do you think? Anyone? Jeffrey?
Well, he's the new boy on the block. He's young, he's good looking, and he's talented, and he's a great warrior, very brave. And Saul has been melancholy. He backed down when Goliath gave him a challenge, and he's yesterday's man. So
you haven't actually answered the question that I asked. I mean, all of those things that you've said is absolutely right. Do I understand from what you say that you think that the women were actually praising David over Saul in a negative way towards Saul?
I do. And remember that the women really didn't have a voice. Everything is male orientated, but here they are, and they've chosen their champion.
Okay, interesting. Yes, Barbara?
Two things. First of all, women singing, was that allowed? And second of all, I think it's his paranoia. I'm sure they were just singing about victory generally.
Okay, so the answer to the first question is, was singing allowed? Clearly it was. Maybe we should be taking a lead from that. You know, they didn't seem to get their knickers in a twist about it, did they? Shaul didn't say, how dare they come out and sing it, you know, send them back to their kitchens. So yeah, that's a good point. And okay, so Barbara thinks opposite to Jeffrey. Barbara thinks that the women were just singing a victory song, and that's just how it came out, and they did not intend to slight King Saul. But of course, Shaul is paranoid, and he sees demons when they are not there. Okay, so we have two differing opinions there. Anybody else got any comments on that before I bring something else into the mix? Anyway, okay, just a quick show of hands. Hands up those that are with Jeffrey on this, that the women have chosen their champion and have transferred their allegiance to David. Nobody?
No,
Okay.
I think it's a mixture of the two, a combination of the two, actually.
Okay, Anita thinks it's both. All right, that was going to be my third question. Who thinks it's what Barbara says, that it's entirely paranoid and they're just singing a victory song?
It's a mixture, combination.
Okay, so okay, mostly Michael Krause hasn't voted yet, and Charlotte and Johnny are blank, so I don't know what they think. Okay, interesting. And then Anita thinks it's both. Right. Okay, well, let's just have a quick look and see what the verses actually say. First of all, verse 6. Read that again for us, Jeffrey, very carefully.
It happened that, it happened that when the troops, and that troops is in brackets in my art scroll, came back.
Yeah, because in the Hebrew, it just says when brackets. Yeah, when they came, what the Hebrew says, Vayehi bevoam, when they came back. So the in brackets is telling us what the they is.
When David returned from slaying the Philistine, that the women from all the towns of Israel came out to sing with timbrels, to greet King Saul with drums, with gladness, and with cymbals. Stop there. Okay, so tell me, just on the basis of that verse, who were the women coming out to greet? Yes, Jeffrey. Well, they're obviously the wives and the daughters of the soldiers who were out, who had returned from the battle that actually never happened. Oh, I'm not sharing the screen, Avril's told me. Thank you for telling me that, Avril. Let me just share it with you. Sorry. Got it? Yeah. Okay. So Jeffrey says these were the troops, the army wives. Well, that's quite right. But what does the pasuk say? Who were they coming out to greet? Saul. Saul. Likrat Shaul HaMelech over here. Likrat Shaul HaMelech. They were coming out to greet Saul. They weren't coming out to greet David specifically. So on the basis of verse 6, I think you would have to say that there was no slight to King Saul, because the pasuk says clearly that the women came out from the cities of Israel to sing and dance Likrat Shaul HaMelech, to greet King Saul. So on the basis of verse 6 alone,
I think that we've got a vote for Barbara. Okay, now have a look at verse 7. Jeffrey, the verse 7 again, please.
The rejoicing women called out and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands.
Okay, now there are two ways of reading this, and you can say, and of course, look at the Hebrew here. The Hebrew says, Hika Shaul ba'alafav. Okay, Shaul has smote. Is that a word? Smote? Yeah, has smote in his thousands. Has smitten. That's better. Smitten, not smote. Doesn't sound right. Shaul has smitten in his thousands. The David. What does the mean?
And.
And
Not
David. Not what did you say, Paul?
Not but.
Exactly. Not but. If it had said Aval David berivotav, but David has slain his 10,000s, then you might understand that pasuk as being a slight to Shaul, to say, well, Shaul's only slaughtered thousands, whereas David has slaughtered 10,000s. It doesn't say that. It says and. So again, I think that you could argue, I think that Shaul is justified in being slighted, but I am not convinced that the women meant to slight him. Yes, Jeffrey.
I think that this is an illustration where it's out of sequence again, because David wasn't a regular soldier until after he slew Goliath, and they're all returning from that. Now we know later on, we know that he used to go into Philistia with his soldiers, and he'd run riot there, and then Thackeray did kill a lot of people. But I don't think he'd killed thousands up to this point.
It's a fair point, but I'm not sure. Let's just have a look at the end of chapter 17, which is the last chapter we did, which will tell us whether that's the case. Now, chapter 17 is a long chapter.
I'll tell you what Rabbi Steinsaltz says, Johnny, when you're finished.
Okay, let's just have a look and then you can tell us that. So here we go. The end of the chapter is a long chapter, remember. David slays Goliath. And then what happens? Look at verse 52, Jeffrey.
The men of Israel and Judah rose up and shouted exultantly and pursued the Philistines up to the approach to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. Philistine corpses were strewn along the Sha'arim road until Gath and Ekron.
So there you go. They had already slain their thousands. As soon as, you remember the story, as soon as David chopped Goliath's head off, what was meant to happen was that they were meant to give up and say, we are your servants, because that was the deal, remember? But they didn't. They ran off. And look at verse 51 at the end. And the Philistines saw that their hero had died and they fled. So then the men of Israel and Judah arose, shouted, pursued them, and killed them. And they were slaughtered all over the place, and there were corpses. What did you say? Strewn on the road of Sha'arim. So if we now go to our chapter 18, when the women have come out, it's not the case that David has not slain a lot of, I'm not saying he's slain 10,000, but he has already slain more than just Goliath.
But surely he wasn't a regular soldier at that point. He was still the youth.
He was, but they are ascribing to him, and that's
No,
I think where
they didn't say David told them to go after them. David won the duel with Shaul, cut off his head, right, and retired, and then the soldiers took off.
No, well, that's not clearly not what happened, because the women have said that David has slain his 10,000s. But I think the point here is that it can certainly be construed that the women were praising David more than Saul. Let's put it that way. That's clear. David slain 10,000, Saul has only slain 1,000. Now, whether or not Shaul was justified in being Roigus about that, yes, thank you, or not, I think is up for debate. He certainly was, because it says so. By Yichar LeShaul Ma'od in verse 8. On the screen it says Saul was very chagrined. Well, I've never used that in my everyday language. What does it say in your art scroll, Jeffrey, in verse 8?
Saul grew very angry, and
Yes,
this matter was disturbing in his eyes.
Yes, I think that's a better translation. Chagrined.
Incensed, they say.
Incensed, yes, that's a good word.
Vexed.
Now, vexed. Vexed sounds a little bit soft to me. If you're
That was
vexed
actually in the Living Nach.
Vexed is well, I don't know what it's like in London, but in Manchester, vexed means you're a bit annoyed with somebody. It was that. It's quite a favourite word of your mum's, actually. That, Jeffrey. She uses the word vexed.
Yeah, and God help you.
I'm a bit vexed with him, but I think Saul was a bit more than vexed. He was bloody angry. Vayichar LeShaul, and Vayichar is an expression of severe anger. But I just want to go back to verse 7 for a bit. This is a common literary method.
Exaggeration.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's an exaggeration, because there weren't tens of thousands that were killed. That's for sure, Jeffrey, you're right. But it's also a literary technique. That's the word I was looking for. A literary technique that Tanakh uses quite often, and it's used in the Torah, and it's used in Tanakh. Michael's nodding. Michael, can you think of some examples of that?
I was going to mention it to you, but I couldn't think of particularly where it comes from.
Okay, well, I'm going to show you Shimshon killed a few thousand using his jawbone of his ass. I think that's an exaggeration. But the technique I'm referring to, well, let me show you on the screen anyway. It's in Parshat Bahar Bechukotai. It's chapter 26, at the beginning of Bechukotai, chapter 26 of Vayikra. And this is Bechukotai, of course, is the Sedra where we have something called the Tochacha, the rebuke, that if you behave well and you do the mitzvahs, all will go well. And if you don't, well, then you're going to get all sorts of curses. And remember, we say it rather quickly, and we say it in a lower voice when we read it. And it's a very bit unpleasant. But before we're told what will happen if we do bad things, the Torah tells us what will happen if we keep the Torah. And verse 7 and 8 on the screen there for you, Jeffrey, if you would read that for us.
You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. 5 of you will pursue 100, and 100 of you will pursue 10,000, and your enemies will fall by the sword before you.
Can you see the literary technique? It's poetry in a way. 5 of you will pursue 100, and 100 of you will pursue 10,000. What's wrong with that?
The maths.
The maths doesn't work, does it? If 5 pursue 100, how many should 100 pursue?
20,000.
2,000.
2,000.
Yeah. But it's a literary technique that you can see a smaller number and then a bigger number, and you see it again in Parshat Hazinu. In Parshat Hazinu, in chapter 32 of Devarim, there it is on the screen for you, verse 30.
How can one person pursue 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight unless their mighty rock has sold them out and the Lord has given them over?
So here the maths doesn't work either, does it? Because if one pursues 1,000, two should pursue 2,000, not 10,000. But it doesn't matter. The point is that the Torah uses this technique when it's using poetry. Ha'azinu is poetry, isn't it? It's a shirah. It's a song.
It's poetic license.
It's poetic license, exactly. Now, there is another example of this in Tehillim, which many of you will say every single night before you go to bed. There's a massive clue. And those of you that don't say it every single night before you go to bed will, or should, have said it last night. There's another clue. What am I talking about?
Noam.
Go on. What do you say after Noam?
The words, you mean?
What? There we go. It's on the screen here. There it is. It's Yosef Peseta. Look at verse 7 on the screen for you. Where's Jeffrey? Is he gone?
1,000 will be stationed at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not approach you.
Again, let's see the idea: 1,000 and 10,000. So all of these examples that I've shown you are it's poetic license. It's poetry. Now, if we go back to our chapter, which is back on the screen for you now, what is this that the women have done? We're told very clearly it's shirah, it's song, it's poetry, because we're told in verse 6, aren't we? The women came out of all the cities of Israel to sing shiur. So this is poetry. It's poetic license, and Shaul has taken it literally, and it's a reflection. I mean, I actually agree with Anita that I think it is a bit of both. I think the women, I think Jeffrey put it very nicely when he said the women have chosen their champion. They have. David is the new boy on the block, as he said. He's the golden boy now, good looking, just saved them from a terrible fate by killing this giant Goliath. And yes, of course, he is the flavor of the month. But it's also clear, and it becomes clearer still in the next few verses, that Shaul is paranoid. Shaul is seeing, reading into this poetry far more than actually was the case. Now, he is justified in doing that to a degree. Why is he justified? Well, let's have a look and see verse 8 again, Jeffrey, please.
Be interesting to know what they actually sang, Johnny, wouldn't it? What the song was, how they sang it to him.
Let's see, what does it say? It says what they sang. Vatomarna, verse 7. They sang these words. I think this is a direct quote. I don't know the tune they sang, but they sang Hikash Shaul ba'alafav v'David b'rivavotav. That was the song. Go on, Johnny.
I'm just saying what you said before now. Rabbi Steinsaltz says that about the tens of thousands, this was obviously an exaggeration, which may have stemmed from their desire to flatter the handsome young man whom they must have favoured.
There you go. There you go. Exactly as Jeffrey said. Very good. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So at verse 8 again, please, Jeffrey.
Saul grew very angry, and this matter was disturbing in his eyes. He said, "They have attributed to David 10,000s, while to me they have attributed thousands. He is lacking only the kingship." And
he is lacking only the kingship. What does the Steinsaltz say for that translation, Johnny? You're muted, Johnny.
Next for him is only the kingdom.
Next for him is only the kingdom. Jeffrey's, the translation was, he's only lacking the kingdom. Our translation on the screen says, and what more can he have but the kingdom? Hebrew says, Va'od lo ach hamelucha. The meaning is very clear, isn't it? Shaul says he's clearly after my crown. Now, I don't know whether it was just me. Does this whole little episode here remind you of anything? Something that you might have seen in the theatre or learned in school? Might just be me, but I'm interested to know if anything sprang to mind when you read that. That Shaul thinks that David's after his crown.
Maybe Macbeth?
Yes, Macbeth. That's exactly what I thought, Michael. Macbeth is the only play of Shakespeare that I know well because I did it for O-level. I did it to death for O-level, actually. Pardon the pun. So I don't know much Shakespeare, but I do know Macbeth. And I was reading this, and I was really reminded of Macbeth. And what I don't know. I wonder whether there's some subconscious Tanakh going on there in Shakespeare. I just mention it because it seemed to me such a powerful connection. I'm glad that Michael said that because it's validated my strange thought processes. Okay, so he's clearly after the kingdom. Yes, Jeff.
I think there's also a contrast with paranoia.
Oh, he's clearly paranoid. Yeah, he's clearly paranoid.
And what about in Macbeth? I mean,
yes, of course. Yes,
that's those are the similarities.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there are parallels there, and it struck me quite strongly. So much so that when I was preparing the shiur, actually, this was last week. When I was preparing it last week, we never got as far as this last week. But when I was preparing it last week, I actually went online and reread a summary of Macbeth just to make sure I hadn't forgotten it, which I hadn't. Yeah.
Just an aside, Shakespeare was educated, he could read and write, and his teachers would have been Galach, because they were the only people that could read and write in those days.
Yeah, and I'm sure that he knew his Bible. I'm certain that Shakespeare would have.
That was the only book. That was the only book that was around.
Yeah, possibly true. Yeah, possibly true. So anyway, Macbeth. I digress. So he's clearly here. Shaul is clearly concerned that David is after his kingdom. Now, he's got every justification for thinking that his kingdom is going to be given to David, or that David's going to take his kingdom. Why is he justified in thinking that? And I refer you back a couple of chapters.
He's already been told that he's going to lose his kingdom.
Yes, he has. Look at chapter 15, verse 28. There you go. Jeffrey, if you would read that for you.
And Samuel
go from 27 first.
And Samuel turned to go, and he seized the skirt of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to your fellow who is better than you."
Right. So Shaul knows that his number's up. He knows that he's going to lose the kingdom, and he does not told at this stage in chapter 15 who it is that is going to be, but it's clear that this is on his mind. This is on his mind, this whole thing. If we go back to our chapter, he's saying to himself, they have ascribed to David 10,000, and to me they ascribed the thousands. Va'od lo ach hamelucha. What more is there for him but the kingdom? In other words, next will be my crown. Yes, Jeffrey.
He also knew from the beginning that because he came from the house of Benjamin, his line would not continue to be the kingship.
Yeah,
and at the time of David slaying Goliath, he asked who his father was. So
I think you may have a point there, Jeffrey, because we are told, aren't we, that let me just let Johnny's back in. We are told in Parshat Vayechi that the scepter shall not pass from David, but it's not quite so straightforward. We now know what that meant. It's not 100% clear that Shaul, even though he will have known what the bracha was to Yehuda at that time, that he will always have the kings from him, that it wasn't quite clear what that necessarily meant. We've got the benefit of hindsight. We've got the benefit of the Mephoroshim that tell us, and we've got the benefit of knowing that David did become king, and that all future kings of Israel must become from David. But at this stage, although he might suspect it from there, I don't think it's 100% clear, but he obviously thinks that David's the one. Yes, Anita?
It also said, I think, as soon as David was crowned just in front of his brothers or father, whatever, that the Shekhinah straight away was taken away from Shaul as well. And he went
right. That's right. And you told me yesterday, when we were discussing this, you mentioned something yesterday, which you will see you are absolutely spot on. And that was the words you used were withdrawal symptoms. And you'll see as we go on in the next few psukim that you are absolutely right, that what he is suffering from is withdrawal symptoms from the Shekhinah, from this spirit. So let's just park that for a second. So David is clearly the rival that he is concerned about. He knows somebody else is going to take his crown. He suspects now it's David. Yes, Anita?
No, I'm trying to mute myself. It's not.
Oh, I'll do it for you. There you go. So he suspects now that David is the one, and he's going to try and do something about it. If he thinks David is the one that is going to take his crown, what is he likely to try and do? Yes, Michael. Yes, he's going to try and get rid of him. What does that remind you of? Something that we have been reading about in the last few weeks in the Parshat HaShavua. What does that remind you of? Anyone? Jeff?
Well, I think it comes later, but it reminds me of what David did with Bathsheba's husband. And
well, that's true as well. Yes, that's true as well. But there was a slightly different motive for that, wasn't there? Which we will no doubt come to in great detail. Yes, David Marks, you're going to tell us what I'm thinking. Read my mind.
Joseph and his brothers.
Okay, go ahead. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, they say, are you going to reign over us?
Hamashol timshol aleinu.
Anu.
Yeah. Are you going to? This is when Joseph has his dreams, and he says, well, you know, that I dreamt about these 11 stars and etc. And the sheaves all bowing down to me. They say to him, you think you're gonna rule over us? And then what do they try and do? Try and get rid of him. Doesn't work, does it? But they tried. Another one that we've been reading even more recently than that. Can you read my mind again, David? It's more midrashic than obviously in the Torah. Actually, that's not true. I'm thinking about Pharaoh.
Yeah, and Moshe in the coal and he's.
Yes, that's right. Moshe, Pharaoh had a vision from his sorcerers that there would be a boy born that would lead the Bnei Israel out and would cause a great deal of problems for the Egyptian king. So that was, of course, the origin of the edict to the Jewish midwives to kill the baby boys, because he'd had this prophecy that a boy was going to be born that would be the savior of the Jews. And so what did he do? tried to get rid of them by getting the midwives to kill them at birth. They didn't do so, so then he tried again, and he told everyone they had to throw the baby boys into the river. But the idea is the same, and this is Shaul. He sees now, he knows from chapter 15 that his number's up, and he doesn't know who his number's up with yet. He's now suspecting it's David. And verse 9, Jeffrey.
And Saul eyed David with suspicion from that day on.
And Saul eyed David with suspicion from that day on. Johnny, what does the Steinsaltz say? You're muted, Johnny. Oh,
He says he was hostile.
Hostile. Okay, thank you, Paul. Hostile. Now, I want to have a look at the Hebrew on this, because it's interesting. We have a kri uktiv. You know what a kri uktiv is? A kri comes from the word koreh. What is a Baal koreh?
A speaker, a reader.
A reader, correct. You are the Baal koreh of our group, Jeffrey. Okay, a koreh is a reader. So a kri is an uktiv, means that a word is read in one particular way, and ktiv comes from the word kotev, to write. It's written in another way. So when you look, if you look in your Steinsaltz, I'm sure the art scroll's got the same. Let me just open my Steinsaltz. Here we go. You will see in the Steinsaltz that in the written psukim, it says Vayehi Shaul, and then you have a word which has got an ayin vav nun with no vowels on it. And to the left-hand side of the page, you have ayin vav yud nun with a tseireh under the yud, so that you can read it, and it says oyen. Now, when you read this, when you're laning Shmuel Aleph, if it's part of a Haftorah, which it probably is, David Marks might be able to help me with that, which Haftorah this is. I don't know off the top of my head, but it probably is one. David?
It isn't.
It isn't? Oh, okay. Well, it should be. So such a great story it should be. Anyway, if you were to read this, you would read it as it says on the screen. Can you see it on the screen? It's oyen. That's how you would pronounce that word. But look in brackets on the screen. It says ktiv. It's written ayin vav nun, which you would have to say is either on or oven. It's not oyen. So there is a kriuktiv. It's called a kriuktiv. It's written one way, but it's read a different way. Now, why? Well, there's all sorts of reasons why. A kriuktiv are not that uncommon. There are quite a few of them in the Torah and quite a few in Tanakh in general. Generally speaking, the reason is that it's not just a printing error. It's usually that there's a meaning that we're being hinted at in one way or the other. Usually the kri, how you read it, is the simple explanation or the straightforward explanation, and how it's written is a little bit of a hint to something else going on. That's what normally it means. So
it looks like it's like has like the word oi and ayin in it. It's like an oi, a bad eye, like a oi vavoy ayin.
Oi vavoy. Okay, well, oi vavoy is with an aleph, so that's. But
it's got the oi, the ayin yud nun is the eye, And it goes into the oi sound. Okay.
It goes,
right.
Yeah, you're right, Faye, but that's only because we're Ashkenazim and don't pronounce our irons correctly. Ruby would be able to say that word far better than we do, and it wouldn't sound like oy vey. But you're on the right tracks in that there are two meanings going on. Now, the way we read it, the Cree is oyen, from the word ayin, correct? He eyed him, and that's why the translation in number 9 on the screen says, and Saul eyed David from that day on. That's a literal translation of that, oyen, from the word ayin, as in ayin hara, an evil eye. So oyen, and that's why your translation, Jeffrey, tried to be faithful to the Cree, but gave us an extra word to help us out, because you can eye somebody in all sorts of ways. You can eye them with suspicion, as you said, or you can eye them with lust. You can eye them with envy. You can eye them with all sorts of things. But clearly the meaning here is that he eyed him with suspicion, which is, if I'm not mistaken, how you translated it, Jeffrey. Is that right?
It was. Yeah.
Now, the Steinsaltz...
And it also started with the word vayehi, which is always something like that something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, vayehi is an indication that that what's coming up is not good, correct? Vayehi bayamim haheim.
So that kind of puts the not so good on the iron.
Yeah, that's right. So this is not a good thing. So it's interesting. We've got three translations in front of us. We've got the screen that is very faithful to the Cree and says he eyed him. It doesn't say how he eyed him, just eyed him. This art scroll says he eyed him with suspicion, which gives us the flavor of what's going on. And the Steinsaltz is not faithful to the Cree at all, and doesn't use the word I. And he says Saul was hostile to David from that day onward. Doesn't say he eyed him with hostility, which is how I would have translated it. Michael, what have you got there? What translation have you got?
Hostile as well.
In which book is that?
That's in the Living Nach.
The Living Nach is hostile. Okay. Now the Living Nach, I understand, because the Living Nach, which is I think it's the Aryeh Carmel.
It's the Aryeh.
Is it Aryeh Carmel or Aryeh Kaplan? I never know.
Aryeh Kaplan.
Kaplan. Okay. So he says right at the beginning of that he gives a disclaimer that he deliberately is not translating things literally. He's translating them in the flavor of it. So so it's interesting. So oyen means I, but the ktiv, what's the word? Forget what the Cree is. Let's just look at the ktiv. Al ayin vav nun. What does that word mean? We have it in various places. Sin. That's right. Avon. Avon is a sin, or avon, as it should be said, is a sin. It's a type of sin. We say that many times. We say it in we said it this morning in Tachanun, did we not? So avon is a sin. So I think that this Korean ktiv is that, and this is why and it fits, of course, with the context. This is why Jeffrey's translation in the art scroll says he eyed him with hostility, because this was a bad thing, and that's why, and as Faye has pointed out, Vayehi fits in as well. It's a bad thing. This eye that Shaul is giving to David, is giving him the eye. He's giving him the evils. There's an English expression. He gave him the evils. Michael's looking very distraught at that expression because it's very modern. Michael, you wouldn't know about these modern expressions. Giving him the evils means he's looking at him with a bad eye. and of course avon is a sin, which is bad. So this Korean ketiv here is the author's subtle or not so subtle hints to us that Shaul is eyeing David with suspicion. We know it because we're reading the translation, but the translations, of course, have got it from the Kri and Ketiv. So we're looking at it a bit backwards. So, Me Hayom Hahu V'Hala. From that day onwards, Shaul is eyeing David with suspicion and hostility, all of those things. So, how is this going to manifest itself? Let's have a look.
Johnny, excuse me, there's one in the passage before, shiur, and the Kesiv is shiur.
Okay.
6, I've only just noticed it in the column there.
shiur, and
it's written without vowels in the passage.
It's written shor. That's interesting, isn't it?
Oh.
Okay, we need to have a look into that and see if we can understand the Korean Kesiv. Sometimes they're understandable, like the one we've just done. Sometimes they're not so obvious. Any shor, shor, as opposed to shiur. Don't know.
Shor is an ox.
Shor is an ox, yes. Okay, we'll have a think about that. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's go on to verse 10. Shines doesn't say anything.
Yeah, Johnny, the Radak points out on that you've got a parallel in Parashas Chaye Sorah, Lalun and Lalin. It's the same meaning, and sometimes it's with a vav, and sometimes it's with a yud.
Right. Okay. So what the Radak is saying is, don't get hung up upon this. This is just a grammatical thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Masha'ain came, which is not the case with our one, because
Correct.
These are clearly two different words. Oyen is the root is ayin, which is an I, and avon is a different root altogether. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. Now, I have got, oh yes, I know what that was about. Okay, back to verse 10, please, Jeffrey.
It happened the next day that a spirit of melancholy from God came upon Saul, and he raved incoherently in the house. David was playing the harp with his hand as he did every day, and the spear was in Saul's hand.
Okay, let's stop there. Let's just stop there, because there's a lot in that pasuk to look at. First of all, we've got another Vayehi. So we know that this is not going to be good. What's coming along is not going to be good. And it was mi mocharot. It was on the next day. The next day. So the pasuk is telling us here that these events follow one another and are consequential. Okay, which means that the evil spirit from God rested upon Saul, which is a more literal translation than the Art Scroll. Vatitzlach ruach Elohim ra'ah, and this ruach ra'ah, this evil spirit, rested upon him. Steinsaltz also says an evil spirit. Jeffrey translated it as a spirit of melancholy. I think we've mentioned this before, because this is not the first time that Saul has had this spirit of melancholy on him. We mentioned it, I think, the first time we came across it. It reminded me of Winston Churchill, who described his bouts of depression. Anybody remember how he described his bouts of depression? Yes, Michael?
I think it's black dog.
Yes, it is. It is he described it as his black dog that rested upon him. And those who are unfortunate enough to have episodes of clinical depression will be able to tell you that it is a horrible experience.
Isn't the word in Ivrit for depression, matzav ruach ra? They use that?
Matzav ruach ra means a bad state of matzav ruach
Dikaon is depression.
Dikaon is depression.
I thought it was
Dikaon is depression, but matzav ruach ra means in a bad mood.
in a bad mood. Yeah.
Bad mood, yeah. So matzav ruach. So yeah, that is a ma matzav ruach. What's the mood? Okay. So matzav is a situation. Ruach is spirit. So what's the situation of the spirit is the mood. Okay, so that's the root of it. But you're absolutely right. Matzav ruach ra means a bad mood. And Faye is also right that the depression is dikaon. So this spirit of melancholy, I'm not so enamored with that translation, to tell you the truth.
Melancholy means sad, doesn't it?
It does mean sad, yeah. And I don't see Shaul as sad here. I see him as mad.
Yeah.
Not sad. He's mad.
Literally.
And
starting to get a little off.
So I understand the word melancholy to be somebody who's miserable and quiet and withdrawn and depressed. And this is not how I see Shaul's evil spirit. I see Shaul's evil spirit as a psychosis, as it's a psychotic episode. Now it's true that people who have depression can get psychosis. They can get paranoid psychosis, and he may well have been depressed. But the word melancholy, maybe it's my misunderstanding of the word melancholy, but I understand the word melancholy, and to me it conjures up a quiet, withdrawn, depressed sort of approach, whereas clearly Shaul is crazy and he's psychotic here with it. So I think I'm going to go with the evil spirit of God, a spirit of psychosis. And now we come to a very, very interesting word, which Jeffrey translated as raved incoherently. Am I right, Jeffrey?
That's correct.
And the Hebrew word is vayit nabe. Vayit nabe. Steinsaltz says
he raved inside the house.
He raved. Yeah, inside the house is the next bit, b'toch habayit. So raved. Art Scroll adds incoherently. Living nach, Michael?
Dark prophecies. The Targum has raved.
Okay, dark prophecies. Now that's an interesting translation. What's the root of this word vayit nabe?
Nevuah.
That's right. Prophecy. And it is a hit palel form. So vayit nabe. What does a hit palel mean? Means it's a reflexive to himself. That's right. So he's prophesying here. Vayit nabe. It's prophesying. Clearly here, because we know, don't we, because we've got the translation in front of us, this is a negative thing. He's raving incoherently. That's not a good thing, right? You don't want to be raving incoherently. So this is a very negative expression. But we don't think of nevuah, of prophecy, as a negative thing, do we? Generally speaking. Shmuel was a Navi. Eliyahu, Hanavi. We don't think of that as raving incoherently. So we need to look at this word. Where have you seen this word before? Vayit nabe. Where have you seen this word before? David knows, but before we give it to David, anybody else know? I did give you a quick glimpse of it a few minutes ago, and then I took it off the screen straight away because I couldn't remember why I'd got it ready. Okay, David, tell us where it is.
Well, it's earlier on in Sefer Shmuel, but the first place we find it, which is very interesting with the translation was a Michael brought dark prophecy. It's Eldad and Medad vayitnaba'u b'toch hamachaneh.
Absolutely right. Vayitnaba'u b'toch hamachaneh, Eldad and Medad. What is the what are we talking about here? There it is on the screen for you. It's in Parshat Baha'alotecha. Remember what happened? People asked for meat, and Moshe said, I can't deal with this lot anymore. Where am I going to get meat from for all these people? And the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, don't worry, I can see you can't handle it. Take these 70 men, 70 elders, we'll give them prophecy, and you'll give from them your glory, etc., etc. Verse 24 on the screen, Jeffrey, please.
Moses went out and told the people what the Lord had said, and he assembled 70 men of the elders of the people and stood them around the tent. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah, keep going, keep going.
The Lord descended in a cloud and spoke to him, and he increased some of the spirit that was on him and bestowed it on the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not continue.
Keep going.
Now 2 men remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the second was Medad. And the spirit rested upon them. They were among those written, but they did not go out to the tent, but prophesied in the camp.
Okay, and there's the word. There's the word. Vayitnaba'u, and they prophesied. There it is again over here. Vayitnaba'u. They prophesied. Now, the story goes on here. What were they saying? Well, we don't know. We're not told. It just says the lad, Vayarot Hanar, a lad ran and told Moshe, Eldad and Medad mitnaba'in b'machaneh. Eldad and Medad are prophesying. And then he says to him, put them in prison. Okay? Adoni Moshe Kila'im. My master Moshe, imprison them. Because they were saying, Midrash, I think Rashi quotes the Midrash that says that they were prophesying that Moshe would not lead the people into Eretz Israel, but rather Yehoshua would lead them in. And Yeshua was not happy with that. He didn't want to hear it. So he says, imprison them. And Moshe says, don't worry about it. Umi yitain kol am Hashem neviim halavai, that all the people should be neviim, should be prophets. So you can see here from this story that this word vayitnaba'u is not necessarily a negative thing. Moshe wants everybody to be a prophet. Why does he want everybody to be a prophet? Because what happened before they prophesied was that the spirit of Hashem, ruach, that ruach of Hashem, settled on these people. And Moshe wants everybody to be imbued with the spirit of Hashem. Now, of course, there is ruach and there's ruach. If we go back to our chapter, Shaul also got a ruach, didn't he? Vatitzlach ruach Elohim ra'ah. He got an evil spirit. He got an evil spirit. So clearly the spirit that Moshe is wanting for everybody, that they should be prophets, vayitnaba'u, that they should all be Nevi'im, is not exactly what has happened to Shaul, but the same process is going along here. And so vayitnabe b'toch habayit, to be translated as he raved incoherently, I think is a living nach type of translation. Even though the living nach actually translates it ironically more literally than the others on this occasion. It's telling us what was going on, but it's not really a literal translation. I think you said, Michael, prophesying dark prophecies or something like that. Is that what you said?
Yeah, black mood.
Yeah, and prophesying?
And he prophesied within the house. That's all it says. The next day, a
prophesied.
black mood descended from God on Saul, and he prophesied within the house.
Okay. So interestingly, very interestingly, isn't it? The Living Nach has done what it says it does, it's not going to do, and translated it more literally. And the Art Scroll and the Steinsaltz have translated it less literally. But the meaning here clearly is that he was having some kind of psychotic episode here. It was vayitnabe. It's a trance-like situation, which can be a good trip or it can be a bad trip. Not that I know about these things, but that's what I'm told.
Daniel said he foresaw a gloomy future for himself in his little note.
Yes, he acted insane. He says he raved inside the house, and then Steinsaltz adds as a note, he acted insane or foresaw a gloomy future for himself. So let's just finish here by reading the translation to verse 11, and then we'll stop there and carry on next week. Verse 11.
Isn't there an interesting thing at the end of that particular verse that it said for the first time when David was playing the harp, it didn't improve his mood?
Okay, that's good. Let's go into that next week, actually, because that's part of what I wanted to talk about in verse 11. So yes, okay, let's just read the end of the verse. David was playing the harp, and as you quite rightly say, normally that calms him down, doesn't it? And the spear is in Saul's hand. And verse 11, Jeffrey.
Then Shaul hurled the spear, saying to himself, I will thrust it through David into the wall. But David eluded him twice.
So this is Shaul's first attempt at killing David. Yeah, and I wonder, let's assume he'd been successful and he'd killed him with this spear. We got any lawyers on today? No lawyers on today. I wonder whether he would have been found guilty of murder, because he is under the influence of a psychosis here. He's vayitnabe. He's having this trip, and in fact, Steinsaltz uses the word insane. So I think his plea would have been insanity. But let's go into this.
A king can't be convicted, but hold it. Surely a king can't be convicted of murder, certainly biblically.
You're right, Michael. You're right. We've learned that in Sanhedrin, haven't we? Actually, no, we haven't learned it in Sanhedrin yet. I learned it with Leon, Zichrono Livracha. I was learning. It's in chapter 2 of Sanhedrin, which I was learning with Leon. We'll get there eventually in Sanhedrin. You're right. A king cannot be convicted in a court. But we'll come to that. But assuming he wasn't a king, he would have got off on a plea of insanity. Let's leave it there because we're out of time, and we'll carry on next week and see how Shaul's paranoia develops, and we'll see some contrast next week between Shaul's feelings towards David versus those of Jonathan's that we've already heard about, those of the people that we will hear about, and maybe not next week, but the week after, those of Shaul's daughters, Merav and Michal. So we will see all of that coming up in the next few exciting episodes. Okay, any questions or comments on today's? Yes, David.
Yeah, can I upset Barbara, please, and probably you, on women singing? Lashir Targum Yonatan renders it le Shabbata, to pray. Le Shabbat, to praise. And according to a note in Art Scroll here, this implies that the women didn't actually sing because it's forbidden for men to listen to the singing voice of women. So according to the Targum, they weren't singing, they were reciting words of praise, and it was accompanied by musical instruments.
Not buying that for 1 minute. That
argue with Jonathan.
No, I'm not arguing with Targum Yonasan. Targum Yonasan says it was praises. You can sing praise as well. Shirim v'tishbachot, you can sing praise. Art Scroll have interpreted Targum Yonatan to suit their view that women shouldn't be singing. So I think we've managed to play a straight bat there to David's googly that he was bowling us there. I'm not arguing with Targum Yonatan, but I am arguing with Art Scroll.
Women sang at the shiur, the crossing of the Red Sea.
They did, but Art Scroll would say that, you know, they weren't there at the same time. It was after the men had gone home, you know.
It doesn't say the Miriam and the women sang.
It just
Az
says
Yashir. Come on, what does it mean?
Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael, but Vatan Lahem Miriam. It doesn't specify that she sang. It doesn't say Vatasha Miriam.
What about Dvorah?
Vatasha Dvorah, I wouldn't argue with.
How's the Art Scroll going to get out of that one then?
Targum translates that as well.
Yes, Jeffrey.
You mentioned about poetic license and song being very similar. And if I can give you an example of that, we all know the Beatles song, It Has Been a Hard Day's Night. And do you remember Peter Sellers imitating Laurence Olivier, Richard III, with reciting It Has Been a Hard Day's Night?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
No, I don't. You have to find me a clip.
Well, it really is a fantastic thing. He's all dressed up. Peter Sellers is all dressed up as Richard III in Laurence Olivier's film version of it, and he recites It's a Hard Day's Night, using all the intonations that Olivier did in the play, in the movie.
Yeah.
Right, here it is. Here it is. It's on YouTube. You want to see it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see it.
It has been a hard day.
Oh, wait a minute. Hang on a sec. I need to put the sound on. Wait a minute. I need to put the sound on for you. Let me just stop share. Stop share and reshare. Hang on a sec.
Where you going?
It has been a hard day's night, and I have been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right. You know I work all day to get you money to buy you things. And it's worth it just to hear you say, you'll give me everything. That's why I love to come home. Cause when I get you alone, you know I feel okay. When I'm home, everything seems to be right. When I'm home, feeling you, holding me. Hi. Hi. It's been a hard day's night, and I have been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right.
That's great.
Genius.
Great.
Absolute genius. Jeffrey, absolute genius. Brilliant. I have no idea what the point is that you were making about that, but it doesn't matter.
No,
We
the
need a little
point
comic
is,
entertainment. That was great.
he did it in as a poem or as a speech, but the Beatles did it as a song.
I see. So your point is to support David's art scroll point.
Correct.
That they weren't singing at all, they were reciting.
Correct.
I never thought of you as an art scroll frummy, Jeffrey.
I'm not an art scroll from it. I'm just giving you an example if you
Wonderful.
like.
Absolutely wonderful. I'm going to have to put this. I'm going to have, when this goes out on the YouTube video, I'm going to have to put a disclaimer that we have Peter Sellers joining us in the shiur. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Worth going over for that. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Shavuot tov.
Please wish Reb Yisroel refuah shlema from all of us.
I will do. Bli Neder. Yes, I will do.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Johnny, Shavuot tov.
Shavuot tov.